Back in 2008, the range of tools that engineers could use to connect computer systems together were getting quite good. Cloud computing was democratizing access to servers. But the telephony ecosystem was still inaccessible to the average developer. If you needed your program to make a phone call and connect a user to a customer service representative, there was no easy way to do that. If you needed two-factor authentication, there was not an easy way to do that. Twilio was started to make it easier for developers to connect to telephone systems using simple API calls. This has unlocked many important use cases, from Uber's communication systems to Airbnb's communication systems to the widespread adoption of two-factor authentication. In this episode, Twilio VP of Product Management Pat Malatack joins the show to explain how the company builds and scales the telephony systems that underpin applications which we use every day. We also talked about how Twilio's culture shapes how engineering proceeds at the company. Twilio has a distinct culture, and it's a really interesting dive into how that culture works and how it has helped the company scale so rapidly. Full disclosure, Twilio is a sponsor of Software Engineering Daily. Every software project uses email. Every time an e-commerce site processes a transaction or a user makes a comment on a social network, email notifications are sent. SparkPost provides email delivery services for apps and websites. To try SparkPost and send 100,000 emails a month for free, go to pages.sparkpost.com/sedaily. SparkPost has a range of pricing options, from free self-service packages to sophisticated enterprise support and services. Start sending emails to your users today. Go to pages.sparkpost.com/sedaily to send 100,000 emails a month for free. Thanks to SparkPost for being a new sponsor of Software Engineering Daily. And if you want to send 100,000 emails a month for free, go to pages.sparkpost.com/sedaily. Pat Malatack is a VP of Product Management at Twilio. Pat, welcome to Software Engineering Daily.
Great to be here.
I want to start by discussing SMS because you spent a lot of time developing the messaging product. What are the conditions when a developer needs SMS functionality in their application?
You know, we see developers adding SMS to their applications in a variety of different use cases. So the most common one, or the one I think folks think about the most, is one-way transactional messaging. Right, your flight's been delayed. Your food's on the way. These type of alerts and notifications that happen. And really, one of the things that's great about alerts and notifications is that there's literally every application needs alerts and notifications as part of the experience. So that's one of the key use cases of messaging for sure. But one of the things we've actually seen is a lot of conversational use cases increasingly, where you maybe start off with a, hey, your flight's been delayed. And then what do you do when the customer replies with like, hey, great, so when's the next flight out of here, right? The flight's been canceled. When's the next flight out of here? And what we're seeing increasingly is these business workflows that maybe initially start with some transactional notification. Your credit card was just charged. Well, wait, I wasn't using that credit card. What's going on? That then actually turn into more and more of these conversational use cases. And so, we're seeing a variety of different use cases that folks are building on top of SMS. We've seen things like chatbots being built on top of the SMS platform. There's the use case I think a lot of folks are familiar about on Twilio, where you're able to text your driver, but that anonymizes the communication, or you can text a personal shopper at Nordstrom. And we've seen a ton of things. New York Times at the Olympics actually had a way to do sort of content and storytelling via SMS. So they would basically send you a text message, and it was Sam at the news desk. And here's what we're seeing in Rio. And they would actually send images, they send messages, and you could actually click on a link to go see the story. So one of the things I'd say across the board is a lot of folks think of SMS as just that sort of first use case. transactional alerts and notifications. But there's a lot more people can do with it, and we're seeing really, really interesting ways to integrate communications into different types of experiences, media experiences, as well as customer service experiences.
Sure. So the core protocol of SMS is pretty constrained. It's a pretty old protocol.
30 years old.
Right. So when you're talking about all these new use cases, does that mean that Twilio has to expand the functionality of the SMS API, or is it more you just keep the API simple and the same and the customer builds in the rich functionality?
Yeah, so the API doesn't change. Twilio's SMS API allows you to send messages to virtually any device on Earth. And a lot of the reason why why are they using SMS? Why is it's such a prevalent way to send messages? Well, it's the ubiquity of the channel. Right. So people want to use SMS because of the number of devices. You can reach literally, there's not a phone on the planet that doesn't support SMS today. And so that's one of the key reasons why folks choose SMS as a channel. And increasingly what we're seeing is that developers and companies need to be able to communicate with their customers wherever their customers are. And increasingly, we as individuals are choosing messaging as the way to communicate with one another. And so that's sort of driving this trend for folks wanting to text businesses as well. So in terms of the API doesn't change. You're able to reach any device on the planet. It's a to, it's a from, it's a body, and you can also hand us an image, and we'll make that an MMS for you. So that doesn't change. And we designed the API. Our approach here is to build intent-based APIs. And so one of the things that's really neat about an intent-based API is we launched support for Facebook Messenger integration back in May. When you design not to expose the underlying protocol and you just design about the intent, a to, a from, and a body, you can actually then adapt it to new messaging mediums that are made available. Things like WeChat, Viber, Facebook Messenger, all which we've been adding those capabilities into Twilio's APIs over time.
So in terms of the SMS, though, since you have been spending your time in product management, in what ways does the SMS product have to evolve, or is it more like you build the SMS product, and if it doesn't have to change much, if the external API doesn't have to change much, I mean, do you have to change stuff on the back end in terms of the capacity planning, or what exactly needs to change in terms, like, what does the SMS team have to do to manage the ongoing API? Yeah,
so the SMS team is constantly making changes to the backend services. At Twilio overall, we deploy to production over 60 times a day. So we're constantly making updates, and one of the things we've made sure to ensure on our API is that we don't change the API behind the scenes on developers. Right? When developers choose an API, when they build on your platform, that's a long-term commitment. Right? And so we've sorted backwards compatibility even on our 2008 APIs, still up and running, still doing their job. But we are constantly changing the services that power those APIs behind the scenes. We're adding new carrier interconnects. We're adding more capacity. We're ensuring that when we originally launched in 2008, we weren't able to support Unicode characters for double byte encoded languages like Korean and Japanese. We added those capabilities in 2011. So even though the to, the from, the body, that part doesn't change, the capabilities of the language, the capabilities of the platform are actually getting better every day, and developers get the benefit of that. If in 2008 you had used Twilio, you'd send a message and it had double byte encoded character, we turn it into a question mark, right? That was sort of the early days of Twilio, 2009 rather. Those are early days of Twilio. But over time, as we've improved the capabilities of our platform, as we've brought on more and more direct carrier relationships, we can actually ensure that you're able to send your emojis just as fine with Twilio as you are sending it in iMessage or sending it to your friends over SMS.
Yeah. In developing countries, you see these interesting applications for SMS, such as online banking.
Yep.
Is that like because it's interesting because in the States we have more bandwidth. So if somebody wants to do online banking, they just use a bandwidth-intensive web application to access their online bank. But in developing countries, they use SMS. Does that change how Twilio thinks about developing the SMS functionality, like making it more involved, or do you really think that the bread and butter is just going to be that simple API with the richness on the back end, improving reliability, improving speed and whatnot?
Yeah, so for us, we've tried to add more and more reach over time, add more carriers, more countries, and we found, particularly some of the things you're talking about are really, really relevant actually for our nonprofit arm, Twilio.org. So Twilio.org goes into a lot more of these developing countries, and there's a lot of nonprofits that are using Twilio in some of these other regions to help sort of those that are underbanked. But at the heart of it, though, it's still the same API. Right, it's programmatic. If you want to, attach customer service on one end, you can go ahead and do that. If you want to attach, a web server that's logged into a banking application on the other end, you can do that too.
Awesome. So there are these short codes, and then there's normal phone numbers on Twilio, or this is just in the text messaging ecosystem. And the short codes have higher throughput. I think they go faster. Can you explain some of what's going on in the back end there? How the short code infrastructure, like when you get a message from 74752 and it's really fast, it's feels faster than a normal SMS message. What's going on there?
Yeah, so today in the U.S., and actually varies by every country in the world. So the complexity of this, I'll talk through the U.S. Specifically, okay. But it will vary in every single country on Earth. So certain countries allow another messaging capability called Alpha Sender. So Alpha Sender basically allows you to just send a message from text, right? Like Nike. Disney, you can actually send a message out. And it's not replyable because it's not in address space. But for a one-way alert, Alpha Sender is pretty common, especially in Europe. So a good chunk of Europe, and that's a capability that Twilio has. Once again, we didn't have it at day one when the product line launched. It's one of those things that's occurred. We've made changes behind the scenes and added those capabilities over time. But what happens with the shortcode ecosystem is effectively in the US, we have a shortcode ecosystem where you can register for a shortcode. You can have those shortcodes be either sort of random set of numbers. You can also have them be, what are called vanity numbers. It's like the shortcode maps to some attribute about your business, right? So I think Square is a customer. They actually have Square, right? So it's like if you were to dial it in on a keypad, you'd have Square. So it's a 5 or 6 digit number, and you can request the specific ones, or you can get a random one. And those shortcodes are basically directly connected to the carrier's what are called SMSCs. But they're basically their messaging platforms inside the carriers. And so we have a direct pipe on those, and it's sort of its own sort of fast lane channel that we can use to reach, large number of folks. So, if you want to be doing things like, sending an alert to all of San Francisco, you're going to need a lot of throughput. Right. And so we have a number of customers that are, have these type of use cases, right? A college campus that wants to be able to alert, all their students all at once. These are the type of things that are really, really common for shortcodes. Or if you're running a campaign, right? If you're, airing a Super Bowl ad, these are the type of things that certainly you'd want a shortcode for. And it's also just a great way to sort of brand your experience. It's easier to remember than a full phone number, and a lot of folks opt for shortcodes.
Now, part of setting up Twilio, the company, was integrating with these telecoms, and I think that was part of why Twilio didn't exist before, because that's a tall order. Can you explain some of the challenges of integrating with telecoms, or how that works, and how it, what's the process of going from telecom friction to the seamless end experience?
Yeah, so before Twilio, the way you would get anything done with telecom or the carriers is first you'd start off. There was no sort of open access, no self-service sign up, to go get a shortcode with the telcos or get a phone number or any of these things. So typically, what you would need to start off with was first sort of protracted carrier negotiations where they'd be asking you to sign, multi-million-dollar 5-year commitment on whatever it is. And for, many of the builders of the world, they're like, I'm just testing out an idea, right? I can't commit to $15 million up front just to see if this thing's going to work. And so for developers, this didn't really map to how developers work. right? And so that was sort of how you would make things happen with the carriers of the world. So what Twilio did was we said, like, great, well, what if we actually go do this with all the telcos and all the carriers of the world? We have a business development team that can go do this. We sort of shoulder the risk of this not found, but then we make it available to developers. Yeah. We make it self-service. We enable developers with just a credit card and $1 a month to be able to get started, so that they can test ideas, they can try new things out, they can create these type of the New York Times experience I was talking about. They can create many of these different ways to use communication than, frankly, the carriers have even thought of, right? And so that was that's step one, right? First, you got to know someone. Like, you can't just sort of walk in the door and get a connection with a carrier. You got to know the ecosystem. You need to be involved. You need to throw down a lot of money to get started, and then you got to integrate with these protocols that, frankly, are pretty ancient. Right, things like SS7 or SMPP. There are 30 GSM protocols that are 30 some years old, which for a web developer is dramatically different than anything they've ever built with before. Of course. So you have sort of these technical barriers, which is these protocols that are very, very different than what web developers are traditionally used to. You have commercial barriers. You have sort of business development barriers, and you have that, and then you have fragmentation. You have this not just in the U.S. It's a bunch of different carriers in the U.S. Then you have it on every single country. And from our perspective, Twilio, why doesn't this work just like email? Why can't I use this as a communication mechanism just like I can everything else on the internet? Yeah. And so really what we've been trying to do at Twilio is to take, to shoulder the burden of solving that fairly complex, fragmented problem everywhere around the globe. We have offices now in Asia, offices in Europe, doing, talking to these carriers, getting these connections in place, and building what we call our super network, building this sort of consolidated set of connectivity all around the globe and commercial agreements. Building that together and then allowing us to take it and hand it to developers in a self-service way, so that they don't need to think about it, that they can just get started and they can actually focus on the building of their application, the logic, and what it does for their customers.
Capsule is a cloud service that protects applications from attackers and improves performance. Capsule sits between customer requests and your servers, and it filters traffic, preventing it from ever reaching your servers. Botnets and denial of service attacks are recognized by Capsule and blocked. This protects your API servers and your microservices from responding to unwanted requests. To try Capsule, go to encapsula.com/sedaily and get a month free for Software Engineering Daily listeners. Capsule's API gives you control over the security and performance of your application, whether you have a complex microservices architecture or a WordPress site. Capsule has a global network of 30 data centers that optimize routing and cache your content. The same network of data centers that are filtering your content for attackers are operating as a CDN and speeding up your application. To try Capsule today, go to encapsula.com/sedaily and check it out. Thanks to Capsule for being a new sponsor of Software Engineering Daily. You see this in fintech, where there's all these antiquated protocols that they're not even like banking. Some of them are banking specific protocols, but a lot of the banks, they're using just FTP and other protocols that don't get used as much anymore. But these things never go away. They just end up getting papered over with new APIs, and it sounds like that's what Twilio is doing. And then you just paper over it, and then you just give the developer a great experience, and they don't know the difference. And that's how software works. It seems to be how software works. Is there's never a big bang hey, let's build a completely new telecom and then build a new API. It's let's build just nice interfaces on top of the old interfaces. And so at the top of that is the nice Twilio interfaces, which are well defined. And I find it interesting because if you say, okay, we're going to start building APIs for communication, we're going to start with voice, and then we're going to go to SMS. There's so many different things you could build for an API for communication that was previously only the domain of somebody who wanted to integrate with these complicated protocols. So when you think about product management, what is the right surface area for an API? Because Twilio has a lot of different APIs, and I imagine that kind of each API is devoted to a narrow team, and that team is very focused on delivering a high-quality product for that narrow use case. Because, of course, developers want highly constrained APIs because it makes it easier to reason about. What's the right surface area for an API?
Yeah, so for Twilio as a cloud communications platform, what we did was sort of take a step back and say, what are all the ways you want to communicate, right? What are the core sort of building blocks, the primitives of communication that ought to be there, right? And we sort of started from that and built these core primitives. And so we built SMS as a core primitive. We built voice as a core primitive. We introduced chat as a core primitive. We've now introduced video as a core primitive. We said, what are all the different ways in which you as a developer, what are all the different ways in which your application may want to communicate, right? We built them as core capable primitives that you can integrate into your application or service. And a lot of folks think of Twilio just SMS, just voice. That's where we started. But we've been enhancing those core primitives over time and really sort of focusing on creating those core primitives such that developers can come in and say, great, now I have voice capability that I can add to my app. Here's all the neat things that I want to do. And then what we do is we look at what they're building on top of that, those core primitives of communication. We look at the problems they're solving. We say, how do we make that easier for the next developer that comes along? So a really good example of this is voice. So we started off with voice as the first product line that Twilio had, and we saw a pattern. We saw a bunch of our customers building contact centers on top of Twilio, right? They'd build an IVR, they'd connect you to an agent that was in the browser using our WebRTC client. They'd be in the browser using our WebRTC client, and what we found was they would be doing things like, hey, well, now I need a call queue, right? I need to be able to put someone on hold if my agents aren't available, et cetera. And so we said, great, how do we make that easier? They'd said, hey, I have to build a whole bunch of logic to do routing to the right agent if you need a Spanish speaker, if you need someone that's a product specialist in X, right? And we looked at our customers, so how are they doing that? And we added capabilities to make that even easier. So we introduced a feature called Queue, which is a call queue as a service, right? We introduced a feature called Task Router. Task Router allows you to basically define capabilities for agents and define logic for assigning customers that are contacting you to those various different agents. And so, what we do at Twilio is we try and build these very, very primitive horizontal communication primitives, right? The most capable way to do any of these different ways in which humans communicate. And then we look at what all of our innovative customers do, what they build on top of those, sort of where they take it. And we say, great, how do we make that easier for the next customer that is just getting started?
It sounds like it requires a lot of communication with those customers, a lot of ongoing communication.
Yeah, we spend a ton of time with our customers. And one of the ways I've described product management at Twilio is it's sort of like meta product management, because many of our customers are building products for other customers.
Right.
And so us sort of sitting in there with their product teams and better understand what type of experience do you want to create for your end customer is a lot of what we find us spending our time doing.
In some ways, that sounds easier than product management for a consumer product, because you're dealing with people who are building products, so they probably know how to communicate what they would like from Twilio.
Yeah, us sitting down with our customers is fantastic as a product manager here, is because you're sitting down with the builders inside. They're the developers, they're the PMs, they're the product teams inside of many of the consumer brands all of us know and love. And sort of sitting with them and sort of brainstorming ideas. How could we make this easier? Oh, great, you want to integrate video into this experience. Great, how do we make that easier? It's just a ton of fun. This is, for me, it's a really, really fun job. Because we get to learn so much from all of the folks that are building on top of Twilio. Sure. We get to learn from our customers in really unique ways.
Yeah. So you talked earlier about how you have SMS, for example, and like you build the API, it's got just the fields from, to, and then content. But there, on the back end, there is ongoing development in how the product proceeds, how it gets built out more richly in the back end. Can you talk, I mean, because it sounds like, so, you take something like SMS or two-factor authentication, it sounds like these very well-formed problems. Once you get it out, it seems like a solved problem. What is the product management process like for an ongoing product like that? And how do you manage it from the back end? Because if you're building these primitives, once you get one of the primitives built, it seems like if the end user is saying, okay, now two-factor authentication is solved for me, they're going to go on and think about something else. And you talked about the product management process of talking to the customers about the things that are built on top of those primitives. So what's the product management process like for the ongoing development of those primitives?
Yeah, so let's take two-factor authentication, for example. So this is actually a really good example for a variety of different reasons. So two-factor auth is one of the use cases we saw on top of SMS. Right. So we have our SMS product. A lot of people said, great, I'm going to send a PIN code out. I'm going to use Twilio SMS to do that. And we asked ourselves, as I mentioned on TaskRouter, we asked ourselves, how can we make this easier? Like, well, at the time, developers were auto-generating PIN codes. They had some verification flow in their application. And so what we did was, how do we make it easier? And lo and behold, one of our customers had already built a solution for developers that did this, a company called Authy. And so we acquired Authy in February a couple of years ago, and Authy basically was another API that sat on top of Twilio's voice and SMS platforms, because they can call you and read you a PIN code as well, that made the problem of two-factor authentication even easier. You didn't need to auto-generate PIN codes. You would just hit a service and say, hey, the user entered X. Is this valid for this given phone number? And they solved more and more of that problem, such that developers didn't need to do as much heavy lifting. And then what we saw was customers wanted even more than that. So, it may feel like a solved problem, but what we're seeing from the market is folks saying, great, I actually want to build two-factor authentication directly into my application experience. And the Authy team released a set of SDKs called OneTouch, which basically allow you to integrate authentication. If you have an application, a mobile application, you can actually integrate two-factor authentication as part of that experience. So rather than entering a PIN code, you just get a push notification. You swipe and you press a yes or a no button. Right? And then it enables you to sort of enter into that web application, and they perform the two-factor authentication through their mobile app. Yeah. And so I think sometimes we feel like these are solved problems, but what we're seeing from our customers is they're sort of pushing the envelope in terms of customer experience, constantly improving it, and they're asking us to solve more and more of this problem for them so that they can focus not on just the communication components. They want to focus on whatever their core business is. Whether that's Uber and it's enabling folks to have a ride anywhere in the world. They want to spend their time focused on that, not the communication that just happens to be required to build a great experience.
And in the Authy example, the surface area of the API does expand, but the old API does not get deprecated.
Exactly. And when we do this well, the idea for the developer is that they can do one integration and get the benefit of any channel that we offer, whether it's a mobile application, whether it's SMS, whether it's voice, and you can just choose, right? And frankly, what many of our customers have done, they've actually let that be their customer preference. Some customers are cool with having the mobile app and getting a push notification. Others want an SMS, and others may want to get a voice call.
Yeah. I'd love to talk more about the strategies for maintaining relationships between PMs and engineers and how you've viewed that. I've heard these horror stories of times where the engineering team that a PM is interacting with loses faith in the PM and kind of just starts ignoring them, and then it's somewhat anarchic. And getting the relationship between the PM and the engineers is pretty important, particularly if that PM is the communication point between customers and engineers. Can you talk about how you've seen that work successfully at Twilio, or perhaps, anti-patterns that you've seen in the past that prevent it from working sometimes?
Yeah, so one thing just off the bat is making sure that the PM isn't just the choke point for communication between the engineers and customers. Put the customer in the room with the engineers, right? Really, and we do this all the time here. Our customers are developers. Those building our product are developers. Many of our PMs are developers. And so just put the customer in the room and let the team understand the customer need firsthand. We have a process here at Twilio we call Own the Ticket, but it's basically where we have our product teams, our engineers doing customer support tickets as well. The more your engineering team knows the needs and the problems that our customers are facing, the better we can build the right products and services for them. And that's not a product thing. That is a everyone on the team thing. And I think sometimes you see organizations that are too specific about no, the PM does this, the engineer does that. At Twilio, our customers are developers, and some of the best ideas in the organization are coming from our engineering teams. And so we try and actually make sure that engineers are sitting with customers as well. It's not just a product thing here at Twilio. That's one thing that is really a big part of our culture. The second thing is we have a small teams model here at Twilio. So everything that we do, we have these what we call small teams. And the small teams at Twilio, basically they typically own a problem. They own a set of services. They're able to release independently. They're made up of usually about 5 to 8 engineers and a PM and an EM, but they have autonomy. They own their own destiny, and they have a customer, and they're accountable to that customer. And that's a real big part of our culture here at Twilio. And teams work with other teams at Twilio the same way we work with our customers via APIs. And so it actually makes a collaboration at scale much easier than you would imagine, at a larger organization, because teams can basically use internal services of other teams that they've built. So much like Authy uses our SMS product and our voice product, we have a set of internal services that teams are. We have a shared billing platform, right? So when a new product line comes out, they're able to use the APIs of our billing team, rather than needing to go sit into a bunch of meetings with that team, coordinate roadmap. And instead, what we drive our teams to do is have self-service APIs for all both internal and external services that we're building.
This gets at one of the things that I find really interesting about Twilio when I'm researching and studying it is Jeff Lawson, the Twilio CEO, really took a lot from his time at Amazon. And I worked at Amazon for about 8 months. And what you're talking about with the well-defined APIs for a team, because Jeff Bezos says communication is a failure. You don't want to have teams verbally communicating with each other about their requirements. You want every team to have a well-defined API that they're exposing, if not to the customer, to other teams. Do you find that phrase to be true? Like communication is a failure, your API should be well-defined in like a wiki or whatever. I mean, talk about how, because I think what you touched on is actually very profound, the fact that you have a well-defined API for the billing team, for example. And if you're some random team in Twilio and you want to interact with the billing team exposes an API, and that is how you build a scalable organization.
Yeah, so I probably wouldn't go as far to say communication is a failure all in of itself. Sometimes the API that's exposed to you doesn't support, frankly, really important needs that you as a team may have, right? The place where we don't want there to be unnecessary communication is if the service solves the problem end to end exactly as you need it, you ought to just be able to use it. You shouldn't be blocked trying to schedule a meeting with some other team somewhere else in the organization. You should just be able to be able to be unblocked and be able to own your own destiny, autonomous, able to release independently. If, for example, that team doesn't support something that you need and that's important to you, typically that's when teams will get in a room and describe, hey, this is why we think this is important. This is why we think you should build this as opposed to another team, because we think this will be common. There's 3 or 4 other teams that have the same problem. So I wouldn't sort of say exclusively communication is a failure. I'd say unnecessary communication can slow organizations down. And making sure that you're having the right communication on the right set of problems is really, really key. And you want to make sure you don't have gatekeepers for the sake of gatekeeping, right? So build those services, allow people to adopt them, and enable enable you to actually improve the products of other teams that frankly could be in different time zones, different countries. You may not even know those teams. That's actually one of the powerful parts of this model. It allows you to basically collaborate without necessarily active collaboration. That's the power of software. And it's the same way that Twilio, we have more than 1 million developers on the platform, right? How do we collaborate with our customers? Same way, self-service APIs, give them tools, enable them to be able to leverage our services without us necessarily needing to have 1 million conversations every day.
Like I said, Jeff Lawson worked at Amazon Web Services, and when I look at the structure of Twilio, I really do see a lot of the best aspects of Amazon. And in the interviews I've heard with Jeff, he talks about his time at AWS as being very formative. Does he refer to that a lot? Does he talk about that a lot? Like, are there any lessons that you've heard him talk about that he's taken away from that experience?
Yeah, we take a lot of inspiration from Amazon, certainly. Jeff had spent time there, so we certainly take a lot of inspiration from them. We also take a lot of inspiration from other places where we have folks in the leadership team that have spent time at other technology companies. Oid for our VP Engineering is ex-Skype. And so there's a bunch of things around communications that we've learned from Oit as well. And I think, the best organizations sort of take the best ideas from everywhere. I'm ex-Microsoft.
I completely agree with that, yeah.
And brought a bunch of ideas from me from Microsoft as well. And so the best organizations take bits and pieces of things that have worked in other organizations they've been in. And certainly we've modeled a lot of what we do around how Amazon's done things. But we've also innovated. We've introduced some things ourselves that are very, very different than what we've seen elsewhere.
What are some examples of that?
Yeah, one of them is actually we do something twice a year called Tweak. So it's a Twilio week, Tweak. But basically, it's a entire week. We actually have our Tweak coming up in the next few weeks here. It's an entire week where we allow our teams to self-organize. And we have very few constraints on our teams. One, we want them to work in teams. They're allowed to self-organize for the entire week. We take, all the sprint planning, all that stops. Teams self-organize. They work on projects that they propose and they pitch. They pitch to the rest of the company. Really the main constraint of it is that it's something that moves the needle for our customers. And so we do Tweak twice a year to really sort of allow us to let other ideas surface up throughout the organization. And some folks in your organization express their ideas in different ways. There's a bunch of folks that express their ideas with just code. Like, great, Tweak is a perfect opportunity to get that prototype out the door, to show how this moves the needle for our customers, and to work with the team to go after that problem space, which is different than sort of the rest of the planning process that we have as an organization. So we've tried to take the best of what we've seen in other companies and mix it in with a little bit of what is our culture and our experiences here at Twilio, and come up with something unique.
That's like a mandatory batch of what other companies might call 20% time, basically.
Yeah, and we allow teams to the other thing that's really useful here is it allows for self-organization. Yeah. It allows you to meet, we have folks on our messaging team working with our video team. We have folks, throughout the company working on new technologies, different stacks. So you get shared learning across the organization in a way that you kind of don't in those 20% time.
That's really smart, because a lot of the companies that do the two pizza team style that Amazon kind of pioneered, and that I guess Twilio has adopted as small teams, as you refer to, you do get a lot of siloing, and there are costs. I mean, there's advantages to the siloing, but there's also costs, clearly. And I like the idea of this is dedicated time to innovate sort of thing. Like when I was at Amazon, personally as a developer, I mean, I started doing software engineering because I like the creative aspect of it, and there wasn't dedicated time to building interesting stuff, So I was, I'd be like at this company, I'm like, I really wish there was a structured opportunity for me to. Instead, you kind of have to navigate the bureaucracy of a company if you want to get your idea out there. Amazon had this 6-pager thing. You got to write a 6-pager to describe your idea, and you've got to do everything on nights and weekends if you want to get an idea going. But I really like the idea of you bake in a biannual process, or I don't know, biannual, multi-annual, what is it called?
Twice a year.
twice a year process of that innovation. That's interesting. Can you talk more about how new APIs or new products at Twilio, like what's the R&D process for getting stuff out the door and getting traction behind a project? How does that work?
Yeah, so the biggest thing I think we do here is we just try and listen to our customers. As a platform company, many of the most interesting things are really just customer driven. We're building these building blocks, and then we observe the way in which all the innovators of the world, the customers building on the platform, we observe the way in which they've configured those building blocks, and that provides inspiration for us for the next product line. Saying to us like, yeah, you should go do something like Authy. We have a ton of people doing two-factor auth. You should build a task manager. You should build a call queue. And so a lot of where our new ideas come from, and a lot of that actually comes from how do we make it easier for customers to do this thing that those customers are already doing. So that's sort of one way in which we've seen new ideas come about, and it is very, very customer driven. The other way is us sort of looking at internal platforms that we've created, things that we've built ourselves to solve a hard engineering problem, and asking ourselves, as a developer company, all of us are developers here, could other developers get the benefit of this? A really good example of that is a product we launched recently called Sync. So Sync is a state synchronization, real-time state synchronization service as a service, right? And we had built a product called Programmable Chat, which allows you to embed chat in iOS, Android, JavaScript. You can sort of build your own chat experiences. You can build things like Slack with the Programmable Chat product. We built that product, but one of the technical challenges we had to do was to build a real-time state synchronization engine for typing indicators, for sending the messages, and making that state synchronization engine be responsive in fractions of millisecond time, right? And so we had built this internal service really to power that product. And then we asked ourselves, like, great, well, developers out there, many developers have this problem, right? And they're not just solving chat. In fact, we actually saw some customers using this to solve using chat to solve a state synchronization problem. We're like, wow, this is really, really cool. So what if we just took this product this internal service that we'd already built, why don't we make it available directly to our customers? Because our teams internally are operating with well-defined interfaces, and their services. We have service-oriented architecture here at Twilio, and so that's one of the other ways that new products come about at Twilio. As we look at the abstractions we've built, the internal services we built, and we ask ourselves, could our customers get benefit from this? Could this help solve a problem for our customers? And when we find that that's the case, we go ahead and we make it a product, and we make it available to our developers, just as we've made it available to developers here at Twilio.
Couchbase is a NoSQL database that powers digital businesses. Developers around the world choose Couchbase for its advantages in data model flexibility, elastic scalability, performance, and 24 by 365 availability to build enterprise web, mobile, and IoT applications. The Couchbase platform includes Couchbase, Couchbase Lite, which is the first mobile NoSQL database, and Couchbase Sync Gateway. Couchbase is designed for global deployments, with configurable cross-data center replication to increase data locality and availability. Running Couchbase in containers on Docker, Kubernetes, Mesos, or Red Hat OpenShift is easy, and at developer.couchbase.com you can find tutorials on how to build out your Couchbase deployment. All Couchbase products are open source projects. Couchbase customers include industry leaders like AOL, Amadeus, AT&T, Cisco, Comcast, Concur, Disney, Dixons, eBay, General Electric, Marriott, Neiman Marcus, PayPal, Ryanair, Rakuten/Vibber, Tesco, Verizon, Wells Fargo, as well as hundreds of other household names. Thanks to Couchbase for being a new sponsor of Software Engineering Daily. We really appreciate it. I want to come back to talking about the overarching principles of Twilio. So, there's these management principles that Twilio has. And I remember first kind of seeing the power of management principles at Amazon. Maybe you have seen them at Microsoft from your time there. I'm sure you've seen them at Twilio. And I'm sure some of the engineers listening have worked at companies where the management principles meant nothing, and maybe all of the companies they've worked at are companies where the management principles have meant nothing. But if you get the management principles right, it actually has a profound impact on the way that the company is structured. Can you talk about how those manifest at Twilio and how you've found those to be valuable and why they are not just a throwaway corporate nonsense sort of thing?
Yeah, so typically the principles that end up being this throwaway corporate nonsense thing are, a set of principles.
Integrity.
Yeah, integrity, right? Like they're not actionable, right? It's like, yeah, well, of course everybody's in favor of integrity, right? Honesty. Like, yeah, okay, great. We don't want a bunch of liars at the company. But they don't actually have meaning within the culture and in the way in which people work. And typically they sort of are like, they come down from some other team and they're like thrust upon the employees. And we actually took a different approach when we put together, our 9 things as we call them. We actually looked at what were the things that we valued amongst each other. And we said, great, let's write that down. Let's document that so that every new Twilion that comes into the organization knows what we're all about. And as we were growing and scaling the organization, you're hiring a bunch of people, we said, let's take a step back and look at the set of things that we all value in the folks that are in the room here, that are at the company today. Let's document that so that it's clear, as you're hiring new folks, as you're spinning up an office in a new it's clear what you value as an organization. And so first, that's sort of the first part of getting this right. Don't have it just be a bunch of words that are created by a team that don't map to what people care about. Start with what are the things that you do care about. Ask the room, right? What are these things that you care about? And that was sort of where they came from. And then you'll see things in there that are representative of the language that we were already using at Twilio. So one of them is no shenanigans, which is really about dealing with our customers and each other in an honest and transparent manner, right? And one of the things that you frequently will hear in meetings at Twilio is we'll be proposing something, well, maybe we do it this way, and you're like, that sounds like shenanigans. And it's not super well defined, right? There's not a definition, this is shenanigans, but you know it when you see it. Right. It's when you're not being transparent, when you're not being straightforward, and that's both how we deal with each other and making sure that that's how you deal with your customers. Right. And we talk a lot about no shenanigans and what that means. And, if we have a service outage, we're clear about it. Twilio isn't perfect. No company out there is. And when we've had problems, we tell our customers exactly what occurred. We've posted those in our blog. We have a status page where we try and be as clear about what's going on as possible, because that just feels like a no shenanigans type approach, right? It just feels the right thing to do. And we really believe developers appreciate that too. Developers know, software's hard. Not everything is perfect. And we spend a lot of time trying to get it right. But we're not perfect either. And developers appreciate a lot more when we go and just say, hey, here's where it didn't work out. Here's what happened. Here's the mistake we made. Here's what we're doing to fix it. We're going to ensure that mistake never happens again. And we outline that to folks. But so that's one example. The other one that I love is draw the owl. So draw the owl is another. It's like, what is that? So there's this internet meme. I don't know if you're familiar with it. How to draw an owl. Yeah. And so that's something we show every new employee when they come on board. But really, what that means here at Twilio is, we're trying to do things that have not been done before. Right? There's not going to be a straightforward way to go do that. And we're perfectly okay with that. And for our employees, we expect you to be tackling problems for which there is no playbook. That is okay. And so you'll see this frequently. It's like, yeah, that's going to be tricky. You're going to need to draw the owl on that. People will say that in a meeting. It's like, what do they mean? It's like, I can't even tell you exactly what you need to do to get this done. You're going to need to figure it out. Sure. And we're all okay with that. It may work, it may not, but we expect you to draw the owl. We expect you to go figure it out. And if something isn't working, you're going to change and you're going to keep moving until you get it right.
How do you select for that quality during hiring? Because that's interesting. Because so what if people are listening and they don't understand what the draw the owl thing means? Basically, is that if there's a problem you need to solve, you're going to have to figure out how to solve it on your own. And that seems like, because I know that there's some people that walk through the door and maybe they just came from college. And I think a lot of people after college, they're used to this sort of recipe for how to solve problems, because that's kind of the way that college forces you to think, is like, okay, you learn something, you study for it, and then you're going to take this test that's going to judge how well you understand the recipe for solving this problem, which is not at all how things work in the real world. And Draw the Owl is sort of the epitome of that. So how do you test for that during hiring?
Yeah, so there's sort of two things we have. We have our 9 things, which I was just talking about, which are sort of the equivalent of values, and then we have the Twilio leadership principles. And the leadership principles, we found ourselves, so one of the 9 things is be frugal. We found ourselves sitting in many of our hiring processes, like asking exactly that question, which is like, is this person frugal? Like, I don't know, like looking at their watch, like what's the right way to evaluate that? And so what we did was we also came up with the leadership principles, which is sort of wear the customer's shoes. That's one of ours. Be intellectually honest. And so we have these 2 means we evaluate. One is, what are our cultural values? What are the things we care about? Those are the 9 things. And then leadership principles are more around what are the type of people we hire? What do we reward? Who do we promote? And what are the behaviors that we want to see from Twilions? And at Twilio, we believe that leadership is a behavior, not a position. It's not management, right? Leadership is an attribute anybody in the organization ought to be showing, and it's not equivalent to management. And so we have those behaviors, and they are a lot more of the type of things that you're talking about that you can evaluate in an interview. Right, you can say, one of my favorite discussion points with candidates is like, tell me about a product scenario where you made a mistake. Like, what did you get wrong? Yeah. Are you self-aware? Did you realize that you got it wrong? How did you course correct? How did you fix it? Yeah. Were you intellectually honest in realizing that you've made plenty of mistakes? And those are the leadership principles are really the things that we try and evaluate in the interviews. And they're more tailored to behaviors rather than sort of values like no shenanigans, draw the owl.
As we draw to a close, are there any recommendations you have for engineers? Because most of the people listening are engineers. What are the recommendations you have for engineers for how they can improve their relationship with the product management team?
Yeah, so I think one of the things that works really well at Twilio and would encourage it everywhere is sometimes PMs shield their engineers from the customer. And I would say, sit down with your product teams that are in these customer meetings and say like, hey, I'd love to be involved. I'd love to better understand, because you get a better appreciation for who the customer is, the challenges the product manager may have that maybe the engineers aren't always aware of, and get yourself involved. And typically most PMs they welcome it, right? And I'd say on the flip side, where you're dealing with a hard technical challenge that maybe the PM isn't aware of, you're tackling something that the PM may not, make them aware of it. At Twilio, given our product is for developers, many of our product managers are ex-developers themselves, engineers by trade, and so I think uniquely that works really, really well here. There's a really good, tight collaboration between the engineering teams and the product teams, and it's all one team. They see themselves less about what their role is and their title is, and more about the problem they're solving for customers. And I think that's the part that's most important. And so yeah, I'd say that the biggest thing is give folks context. Both the PM helping get more context to the engineer, and if your PM isn't involving you with customers, ask them. Like it's the best way to make sure we're building the right thing. And then vice versa, where you're dealing with a hairy technical problem, don't feel like you need to shield your product manager from it. Say, hey, listen, I thought it was going to be X story points. I got in there. It looks very, very different. And here's what I'm worried about. Give them that other context, and then work together. Say, okay, we can reprioritize this. We can push out that, rather than sort of moving forward to hit a date or to hit a launch or give folks context. Typically, I think is one of the best ways to ensure you have a good working relationship. One other thing we've done at Twilio, which I think is important, so teams own and operate their services in production. We have the product managers actually feel the pager pain as well. And so, when a service isn't performing, it's not just the engineers that are on call that get paged. The PMs get paged as well. They have a very different role in the on-call process here at Twilio. They're responsible for, I talked about transparently communicating with customers. The PMs take point on that. Whereas the engineers are taking point on fixing those services. But it allows the PM to understand the customer impact of technical debt, right? And it creates, I think, a really, really good understanding, empathy on the product side for what engineering is working on, and vice versa. When hey, we haven't had any problems, the services are operating great, and the PM saying, hey, we can go faster, we should add this new capability. They do it from a place of understanding and of knowledge of what's important to our customers. And so it really builds better empathy between the product managers and the engineers. And I think you really want to make sure that you're at a place where folks care less about role, title, et cetera, and it's more about what are we all doing to solve this problem for our customers.
Okay, so last question, kind of unrelated to Twilio. I noticed that you studied human-computer interaction, and we live in a tremendously fast-moving time now, and I'm sure you are bearing witness to this, as Twilio is the underpinnings of a lot of revolutionary applications. Do you have any interesting predictions for how human-computer interaction is going to evolve over the next 5 or 10 years?
Yeah, so one of the things that we're seeing that is pretty exciting is sort of the AI and bots and sort of changing how people communicate.
Yeah, and people underestimate this.
Yes, so we're seeing a ton of that on the platform, and it's still very, very early days.
It is.
It's very, very early days. Most of the bots I've interacted with are not particularly compelling, but it's very, very early days. And so this is sort of one of the changes that we're seeing is that.
But like when I mess around with an Echo or a Google Home, I really do start to get the early iPhone feeling. It's like the feeling that you had in the early days of the smartphone. You're like, this is pretty profound.
Yeah, and this is really, really just the start. There's I think a lot of good that these services are going to create for consumers out there. A lot of it's going to make technology, frankly, a lot more approachable, a lot more accessible. Right, like a lot of the reasons why I have an Alexa at home, I have a smart home, lights, everything. A lot of the reason why smart homes hadn't taken off is that the interface for smart homes didn't make any sense. But now that you have things like Alexa, you can buy a 6-pack of Alexas, put them in every room. Now that you have these type of interfaces, it's changing what you can do with technology. And so we're seeing a ton of that on the platform, changing the way humans both interact with other humans and humans interact with machines. And one of the things that I'm really excited about is actually the blend in between these, where you may start off, hey, what are the store hours? You may be, chatting with a business. What are your store hours? What's the menu look like? You start off with these things that machines can solve really well. And then later on, you say can you tell me a little bit, let's say it's the menu example I'm going through. It's like, well, tell me about how you cook that pasta. Like maybe something that a machine doesn't solve well. Yeah. Like, great. Now we can seamlessly bridge and automate a bunch of these interactions, seamlessly bridge to a human as well. Yeah. And so I'm really, really excited about the advancement of AI and how that's going to change how we communicate with one another, how we communicate with businesses and brands. And I think it's actually going to create a challenge for a lot of businesses out there, which is that now you need to communicate with your customers in so many different channels. Like you roll the time back to the mid 90s. It was like you had a phone number and that was how your customers communicated with you. Now it's like your customers are going to send messages to you on Messenger. They're going to talk to your Alexa to get support. And really a lot of what we're doing here at Twilio is allowing folks to have a unified platform to build those type of experiences on top of, plug machines on one end, plug humans sometimes on the other end, and unify that across all the different channels that your customers are going to be talking to you in.
Well, Pat, thanks for coming on Software Engineering Daily. This was a great interview.
Yeah, it was fantastic chatting with you.
All right, thank you. Thanks to Symphono for sponsoring Software Engineering Daily. Symphono is a custom engineering shop where senior engineers tackle big tech challenges while learning from each other. Check it out at symphono.com/SEDaily. That's symphono.com/SEDaily. Thanks again, Symphono.
Wow.